Ladies and gentlemen, let me start by saying something that might surprise you. A man pulling away doesn't always mean he's stopped caring. In fact, sometimes it's because he cares more than he knows how to handle. You see, the moment a man catches real feelings, he steps into unfamiliar territory. And for many men, that territory is emotionally dangerous because love requires vulnerability. And vulnerability, that's scary when you've been taught your whole life to be tough, to stay in control, to never need anyone. When a man feels something deep, it shakes his internal world. He may start to wonder, am I ready for this? What if I mess this up? What if she sees all the parts of me I've been trying to hide? This fear doesn't come from a lack of love. It comes from the weight of it. Some men pull away because the feeling is real, and that realness exposes every insecurity they've ever buried. Suddenly, it's not just about attraction, it's about being seen. And for a man who's never had the tools or space to process his emotions, that can feel overwhelming. Now listen carefully. This part is important. It's not your job to fix that. You don't chase someone into emotional maturity. You don't teach someone how to receive love by shrinking yourself to keep them comfortable. You hold space, but you don't abandon yourself. Many men are raised in environments, socially, culturally, and sometimes even emotionally, where vulnerability is seen not as strength, but as weakness. From a young age, boys are often told to man up, to stop crying, to be tough and in control at all times. Emotional expression, particularly fear, sadness, or anxiety, is discouraged or outright punished. So by the time a man reaches adulthood, he's learned to internalize his emotions rather than express them. He's developed an emotional operating system that relies on control, detachment, and self-reliance, not openness or emotional fluidity. Now, enter real connection when he begins to feel deeply for someone. Suddenly, this system he's spent years building gets disrupted. Love has a way of cracking open the parts of us we've kept hidden. And for many men, this feels incredibly unsettling. Vulnerability is not a comfortable space for him. It's not that he doesn't want to be close or doesn't care deeply. It's that closeness threatens to expose feelings he's spent most of his life suppressing. This creates a conflict within him. On one hand, he's drawn to the warmth, connection, and intimacy he feels growing. On the other, he's terrified of what that closeness demands of him emotionally. The more he feels, the more his internal alarm bells start to ring. He may not even understand why. The connection feels good, but also risky, because in his subconscious mind, vulnerability equals exposure, and exposure equals potential pain. Falling for someone opens up the possibility of being rejected, abandoned, or misunderstood. These aren't just hypothetical risks. They tap into real, often unhealed emotional wounds. So instead of moving toward the connection, he retreats. He pulls away, not because he doesn't feel, but because he does. And those feelings scare him. This pulling away can look like sudden distance, decreased communication, moodiness, or emotional shutdown. You might feel like he's withdrawing at the exact moment you're becoming closer. That's not a coincidence. It's a protective response. Think of it as an internal emotional circuit breaker. When the emotional charge gets too high, his system trips and shuts down to avoid overload. In truth, he may not even be fully aware of why he's retreating. He might just feel overwhelmed, confused, or anxious without having the language to articulate it. And It's important to understand this is not about blame. It's about emotional conditioning. Many men have never been taught how to stay in vulnerability, how to communicate through it, how to name their fears without shame. So when genuine feelings emerge, their first instinct is often to hide, not to connect. The act of catching feelings forces them to confront emotions they've rarely given themselves permission to feel. It demands presence, honesty, and emotional risk, all things that feel foreign or frightening to someone who's spent a lifetime protecting themselves from emotional exposure. This doesn't mean all men will pull away when they catch feelings, but for many, especially those who haven't done deep emotional work, this behavior is common. They're not pulling away because their feelings are fading. They're pulling away because the feelings are real. And they don't yet have the emotional capacity or tools to manage the internal chaos that real intimacy can bring. When a man starts to develop genuine feelings for someone, he often begins to experience something that catches him off guard. The sensation of losing control. For many men, control equals safety. Control over their emotions, over their environment, over how much they let others in. It gives them the feeling that they are grounded, that nothing can knock them off balance. But falling in love is not a controlled experience. It is unpredictable, emotional, and layered. It forces him to open up in ways he may not be prepared for. As feelings deepen, so does the sense of unpredictability. He can no longer compartmentalize or keep everything in check the way he used to. Suddenly, he finds himself thinking about someone constantly, wondering what they're doing, what they're feeling, how they perceive him. That emotional influence, being affected by someone else's actions or moods, can feel destabilizing. He's no longer fully in charge of his own emotional state, and that loss of autonomy can be deeply uncomfortable. It creates a fear that he might lose himself in the connection, or worse, lose his ability to stay in control of how he feels and reacts. This feeling of being emotionally out of control can trigger a defense mechanism. To regain that sense of balance, he may instinctively pull back. The distancing is his way of trying to reset emotionally, to put some space between himself and the overwhelming feelings that threaten his usual sense of composure. It's not always a conscious decision. Sometimes he doesn't even know why he's pulling away. He just feels a sense of urgency to reestablish emotional safety by withdrawing from the intensity of the connection. Control also extends beyond emotion. It touches on identity. When a man is falling for someone, he may begin to fear that his priorities, his independence, or his sense of self will be compromised. He may worry that being in love will somehow make him weak, dependent, or less focused on his goals. The irony is that love doesn't actually take those things away, but the fear of that loss can feel very real, especially for men who equate strength with detachment. The idea of being emotionally tethered to someone can feel like a threat to who they believe they are. Then there's the pressure that comes with feeling deeply. The more invested he becomes, the more he realizes what's at stake. Real emotions raise the emotional cost of potential rejection or failure. When he was in control, love was light and playful. But once he catches feelings, everything suddenly matters more. Every word, every silence, every shift in your energy feels amplified. He doesn't want to mess it up, but that desire to get it right can create anxiety, and anxiety makes him crave distance as a way to calm down. So pulling away is sometimes less about how he feels about you and more about what he feels inside himself. He might not know how to talk about the discomfort of surrendering emotional control or even realize that's what's happening. But the moment he feels the connection becoming something real, something meaningful, that's when his internal alarm system kicks in. Not because the love is wrong, but because it threatens to dismantle the emotional walls he's relied on for years. And losing that control, even in the name of something beautiful, can feel terrifying when he hasn't yet learned that real strength isn't found in holding it all together, but in allowing himself to let go. When a man begins to feel real, vulnerable emotions for someone, it doesn't just awaken the joy of connection, it often stirs up the ghosts of his past. Many people carry emotional wounds from previous relationships, but for men, those wounds are often buried deep beneath layers of silence and self-protection. They may not have processed past heartbreaks, betrayals, or emotional neglect. Instead of healing, they've learned to suppress, distract, or move on quickly, telling themselves to get over it without ever really understanding the emotional weight they're still carrying. So when a new connection begins to feel serious, those unresolved emotions can suddenly resurface. Feelings of love and closeness act like emotional mirrors. They reflect not only what's happening in the present, but also what's been left unhealed from the past. If he once loved someone deeply and was hurt, that old pain doesn't vanish. It lies dormant until a new experience triggers it. The closer he feels to someone now, the more his subconscious fears begin to whisper. What if this ends the same way? What if I trust again and get abandoned? What if I let someone in and they leave like last time? For some men, even if the previous pain wasn't from a romantic partner, but from childhood, like emotionally unavailable parents, distant fathers, or inconsistent affection, those early wounds shape how safe they feel when emotionally close to someone. A man who never experienced secure emotional attachment may not even recognize what safety in love looks like. So when things feel intense or emotionally deep, he might not experience it as love, he experiences it as a threat. And that's when he begins to retreat, confuse, and distance himself. He may not realize that he's reacting to past pain. He may not even be consciously thinking about his ex or his parents, but his emotional system remembers. It kicks into protective mode the moment vulnerability feels too familiar. And because he's rarely been encouraged to reflect on or talk about his emotions, he doesn't have the tools to navigate this internal chaos. To him, all he knows is, I need space. This is too much. I feel trapped. In reality, it's not the person or the love that's too much. It's the weight of everything he hasn't dealt with that suddenly gets activated. This is why many men will say things like, I don't know what's wrong with me, or you didn't do anything wrong. I just need time, or I feel overwhelmed and I can't explain it. They're not lying. They genuinely don't know why the connection that once felt so exciting now feels like something they want to run from. And it's because love isn't just about the present moment. It's about emotional memory. And if that memory is full of pain, unpredictability, or disappointment, their system resists repeating the pattern, even when this new person isn't the one who hurt them. Pulling away then becomes a form of emotional self-preservation. It's a subconscious attempt to prevent future heartbreak by preemptively creating distance. It's a way of saying, I'll break my own heart before you get the chance to do it. The irony is, by trying to avoid pain, they often create the very loss they were afraid of in the first place. But until they confront those past emotional wounds and allow themselves to actually feel, grieve, and process them, they'll continue to retreat from real love. Not because they don't want it, but because it touches something inside of them that still hasn't been healed. When a man starts to catch real feelings, one of the most unsettling experiences for him is the rising fear that he might not be enough. This fear doesn't always scream loudly. Sometimes it whispers in quiet, subtle ways that even he doesn't fully recognize. But it's there, running in the background of his emotional system. As the emotional connection deepens, so does the pressure he feels to measure up, to be worthy of the person he's falling for, to provide, to protect, to show up perfectly even when he feels imperfect. And if there's even a sliver of insecurity buried within him, love will find it. This isn't just about physical appearance or financial status, though those can be triggers. It's deeper. It's about emotional adequacy. Many men, especially those who've never had a safe space to explore or express their emotions, carry around this quiet inner voice that says, what if I can't give her what she needs? Or what if I fail at this? Even if he's confident on the outside, even if he seems successful or composed, the fear of emotional insufficiency can sit like a heavy weight inside him. When he's not sure he can meet the emotional or relational expectations, spoken or unspoken, he begins to panic internally. He may start overthinking his every move, analyzing her responses, worrying that he's not making her happy or that he'll be the one to disappoint her. That fear of failure becomes paralyzing, and in order to protect his pride, his ego, and sometimes his heart, he begins to distance himself. It feels safer to pull away than to risk being seen as inadequate. It's a defense mechanism that says, if I back off first, then I won't have to face the possibility of not being enough. This also connects deeply to masculine identity. A lot of men are taught to equate their worth with their ability to fix things, to be strong, to be the one who has it all together. But emotional intimacy requires the opposite. It requires presence over perfection, authenticity over answers. And that can be confusing for a man who's always believed he needs to show strength, not vulnerability. He might think being enough means having it all figured out, being stoic, always in control. So when he begins to feel emotionally exposed, it doesn't feel like connection. It feels like failure waiting to happen. This is even more true when he starts comparing himself not just to other men, but to an imagined version of what he thinks he should be. Maybe he's comparing himself to her expectations, to her past partners, or to the person he wishes he was, but doesn't yet feel like. He begins to question if he's emotionally mature enough, smart enough, attractive enough, or stable enough to hold the kind of love he feels growing. These doubts can spiral quickly, turning something beautiful into something overwhelming. What often makes this worse is the silence around it. Most men don't speak these insecurities out loud. They don't say, I'm scared I'm not enough for you. Instead, they withdraw. They become distant, distracted, or emotionally unavailable. They might even end the relationship altogether. Not because they don't care, but because caring too much has started to feel like a risk they can't emotionally afford. And unless they've done the work to unpack where that fear is coming from, it will keep showing up, not just in this relationship, but in every relationship that demands real vulnerability. Because until a man believes deep down that he is enough, not perfect, but enough, every time he catches feelings, part of him will want to run. As a man begins to develop real emotional feelings in a relationship, something unexpected often happens. What started as excitement begins to feel like pressure. This shift doesn't mean he doesn't care or isn't invested. It means the emotional weight of what love might require of him starts to settle in. And for many men, especially those who've never had a healthy emotional roadmap, this pressure feels like an invisible burden they don't know how to carry. In the early stages of attraction, everything feels light, playful, and free. But as emotional intimacy deepens, there's a natural shift. Expectations arise. There's an unspoken sense of what's next. Will he commit? Will he open up more? Will he meet your emotional needs consistently? And while these are normal relationship questions, for a man who hasn't yet built emotional endurance, they can feel like demerits, even if you're not directly making any. Simply knowing that someone is emotionally invested in him makes him feel accountable in a new way, and that can be incredibly overwhelming. This internal experience often has nothing to do with the other person's behavior. She might be kind, understanding, patient, yet he still feels the pressure building. That's because it's not about her, it's about the expectations he puts on himself. Deep down, he might believe that love means he now has to get it all right, to never mess up, to be emotionally perfect, to always show up strong and consistent. And with that belief comes fear. Fear that he won't be able to live up to that role. Fear that if he shows his flaws, he'll lose her. Fear that the relationship now comes with obligations he's not emotionally ready to fulfill. Many men equate emotional connection with responsibility, sometimes even with losing freedom. This is especially true for those who have grown up believing that relationships require sacrifice of self. So instead of seeing the relationship as a space of mutual growth and support, he starts to view it as something he must now perform in, maintain, or prove himself in constantly. That perspective turns love into a task, not an experience. And when love starts feeling like work, instead of warmth, retreat becomes the easiest escape. This is also where emotional immaturity plays a role. A man who hasn't yet learned to manage pressure in a healthy way will look for relief in the only way he knows: distance. He might begin canceling plans, becoming emotionally inconsistent, or even saying things like, "I just need time to figure myself out," or "things are moving too fast." These are not lies, but rather surface level expressions of a much deeper struggle. He's not saying, "I don't care about you." He's saying, "I feel like I can't meet what I believe is expected of me, and that makes me want to disappear." The tragedy is that this pressure is often self-created. In reality, most women don't want perfection. They want presence, truth, and emotional honesty. But he doesn't realize that his own beliefs about masculinity, emotional performance, and failure make him assume that love requires more than he can give. So he steps back, not because the relationship is wrong, but because the weight he thinks he has to carry inside it feels too heavy. This is how genuine feelings become confused with suffocating responsibility. The very thing that was supposed to bring him joy, emotional connection, starts to feel like a threat to his stability. And without the tools to communicate, to be vulnerable, or to question the story in his head. He chooses space over closeness, silence over honesty, and comfort over growth. When a man begins to fall for someone, it doesn't just affect his heart, it shakes the foundation of who he believes he is. Love, especially the kind that invites emotional depth and connection, can bring on an identity crisis. This is not because the relationship is wrong, but because it challenges him to step into a version of himself he might not be ready for, or one he doesn't fully understand yet. When he's been living life on his own terms, managing his time, emotions, and freedom the way he's always known, real connection can feel like a disruption, not because it's bad, but because it asks him to evolve. Many men spend years building a sense of identity around independence. Their self-worth is often tied to what they can control: career, achievements, physical strength, or emotional stoicism. The moment someone comes into their life and genuinely affects them emotionally, it introduces an entirely new dynamic. Suddenly, his sense of self isn't just about him anymore. He begins to feel emotionally impacted by another person's needs, moods, or expectations. And that interdependence, although normal in a relationship, can feel destabilizing if he's built his identity on detachment or autonomy. This is especially true for men who equate emotional closeness with self-sacrifice. He might begin to wonder, will I lose who I am in this? Will I become someone else to keep her happy? Will I still be free to think, feel, and live the way I want? These are real fears, even if they sound irrational. In his mind, he might believe that giving in to love means giving up some part of himself. And when that belief kicks in, he may start to fight against the connection, not because he doesn't feel it, but because he doesn't yet know how to integrate it into his identity. This fear is often magnified by cultural narratives that teach men to prioritize success and logic over emotional expression. Vulnerability is rarely modeled as a masculine trait. So when a man finds himself caring deeply, when he's affected by someone, when he misses them, when he starts thinking about a future, he may feel like he's losing grip on the version of himself that once felt safe and predictable. And instead of leaning into the transformation, he resists it. He pulls away, needing space not just from the relationship, but from the mirror it holds up to him. In this state, love feels like a force trying to rewrite his story. And unless he has a strong internal foundation and emotional literacy, that rewriting feels more like erasing. He doesn't yet understand that love doesn't erase who he is. It reveals who he could become. But because he hasn't experienced that kind of emotional evolution before, he defaults to fear. His instinct tells him retreat, reclaim space, reassert control. So he disappears emotionally, becomes distant, or withdraws, not because the feelings have vanished, but because the feelings have forced him to confront himself. Sometimes it's not the relationship he's unsure about, it's himself. Can he still be strong and be vulnerable? Can he be independent and still allow himself to lean on someone? Can he have a relationship without losing himself in it? These are the questions love quietly plants inside him. And unless he's ready to wrestle with them, he'll pull away. Not because he doesn't care, but because the relationship is asking him to grow into someone he's not sure he's ready to be yet. And growth, especially when it challenges a man's sense of identity, often starts with resistance before it turns into transformation. When a man begins to feel real emotional intimacy, he may unconsciously start pulling away, not to hurt the connection, but to test it. At first glance, it might look like he's losing interest, but in many cases, it's a way of trying to gauge something deeper. Emotional safety. For a lot of men, emotional safety isn't something they've been taught to expect or even recognize. So when they start catching feelings, there's a part of them that wonders, can I really trust this? Can I be myself here? Will she still be here if I don't show up perfectly? And that uncertainty can lead to a silent test. This test doesn't look like a quiz or a game. It's more like emotional retreat. He pulls back a little. He stops calling as often. He waits longer to respond. He might become inconsistent in his affection. And while this can be deeply confusing and even painful for the other person, it's important to understand what's really going on beneath the surface. He's not always trying to manipulate or play hard to get. Sometimes he's pulling away because he wants to see how you'll react when he's no longer fully on. He's trying to feel out whether it's still safe to be emotionally invested. For many men, especially those who've been emotionally hurt or judged in the past, this pattern of testing is their way of protecting themselves. They may have been in situations where opening up was used against them, where vulnerability led to disappointment, criticism, or abandonment. So now, even when they meet someone who feels emotionally available, their nervous system remains on high alert. They don't want to get hurt again. So instead of asking directly, "Are you safe?" they subconsciously try to find out through withdrawal. The silence becomes the question: will you panic, chase, criticize, or stay calm? If the response to that silence is anger, begging, or emotional instability, it reinforces his fear that closeness equals chaos. But if he pulls away and finds that you stay centered, respectful, and self-assured, that signals something powerful to him: emotional safety. It shows him that he doesn't have to perform to be loved. That love in this space is not conditional on constant validation or presence. And for a man who's never experienced that kind of grounding before, it's both foreign and magnetic. But this doesn't mean his behavior is always healthy or fair. Emotional testing, even if unconscious, can still be damaging when it creates confusion or instability in the relationship. It's a pattern that reveals a man's lack of emotional maturity, not his lack of interest. He may care deeply, but he doesn't yet know how to communicate his fears, so he tries to provoke reassurance through distance instead of conversation. The test becomes his way of saying, "Prove to me that I'm safe here," without having the courage to say those words out loud. It's important to note that emotional safety goes both ways. While he may be pulling away to test your response, it also becomes a test for you of your boundaries, your self-worth, and your emotional resilience. If you constantly feel like you have to prove your value to keep him engaged, that's not emotional safety, it's emotional survival. So the real question becomes, can he pull away without losing you? And can you stay centered without losing yourself? What he's searching for isn't just space. It's a deeper answer to a silent question: will you meet me in calm, not chaos? Can I fall and still be held, not judged? And until he knows the answer, he may keep pulling back, not to disappear, but to see if he's finally found a place where he doesn't have to wear armor just to be loved. What looks like distance is often a silent cry for emotional safety. What feels like rejection is, In many cases, a man's battle with his own vulnerability, his past wounds, and his fear of not being enough. When a man pulls away after catching feelings, it's not always because he's lost interest, but because love for him doesn't just open his heart, it exposes it. The key is not to chase or fix him, but to stay grounded in your own worth. You are not responsible for healing someone who hasn't chosen to heal themselves. You're allowed to hold space, but never at the cost of your peace. Because the right man, one who is emotionally ready, won't run when it gets real. He'll rise, he'll lean in, he'll meet you in the vulnerability, not hide from it. Let love find you in your power, not in your pursuit. Because the love that stays won't need to be chased. It will recognize you and choose to stay. If you are like this video, then like and subscribe. Thank you.